Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Despite the fact that it's one of my favorite games of all time, I haven't actually played Super Mario Galaxy in a few years, so when the remaster came out for the Switch, I decided that it was finally time to replay this classic. And when I did, I was actually pleasantly surprised by the changes that had been made to it. There was a significant step up in visual clarity and smoothness, along with a ton of other minor quality of life features that pushed an already great game even closer to perfection. It was going well all the way through the tutorial and beginning of the terrace, until I unlocked one very specific level. This is Loopy Swoop Galaxy. Those of you who have played Galaxy before probably instantly recognize it as one of the most notoriously frustrating levels in the game. The concept is fairly simple. You glide through a track made of water on the back of a manta ray, and upon finishing a lap of the course, you are taken to the end platform and given the Power Star. Now, this might not seem difficult at first, but there are a few factors that make it exponentially harder. Firstly, you don't move around with the joystick. The only way to turn is by physically twisting the controller, which removes a lot of precision. Next is the fact that the water is incredibly choppy, with the waves sending you bouncing into the air every few seconds, adding even more inconsistency into the mix. And to top it all off, there are no guardrails at any point throughout the course, which means that if you mess up once, you're getting sent all the way back to the beginning. I had always dreaded playing Loop-de-Loop. In fact, when I think of Super Mario Galaxy as a whole, this level sticks out as a decidedly negative aspect, and quite honestly, it might be part of the reason why I've put off playing it for so long. But as I soared towards the starting platform, I made a decision. No longer would I let this level taint my memories of an otherwise phenomenal game. I needed to completely master this minigame to put it to rest. And in my mind, the best way to master something is to learn to beat it as fast as possible. I was going to speedrun Loop-de-Loop Galaxy. I finished the tutorial and got to work on completing the course for the first time. But even with the Switch 2's far superior motion controls, it still took me a few tries to make it through. I decided that I should probably play it through a few more times to get a better grasp of how the level was structured before I tried anything else. After a while, I had gotten a pretty good mental image of the track. You can essentially divide it into 3 sections that each line up fairly well with these rings. Section A begins at the golden star, which denotes the starting and finish line. After going through the green rings, you have 2 mild turns in each direction before one fairly sharp corner to the right that leads into Section B. This part consists of one long gradual turn to the left that morphs into an upwards loop before continuing through the red rings to Section C. Here we have a sharp incline before the steepest drop on the track, where you launch off of it and fall into the dip below. There's one more smaller hump to get over before the course's final loop, which takes a sharp right at the end to lead into the finish line. At this point, my best time for the course was just over a minute, but I knew it could go much lower. But before we start optimizing this track, I need to tell you about today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive military vehicle combat game ever made. It has thousands of vehicles, ranging from planes and helicopters to tanks and gigantic battleships. All of these are incredibly detailed and realistic, and even more so when you start customizing them with countless camo patterns, historical markings, and decorations. But this intricacy isn't just limited to how they look from the outside. On the interior, everything is modeled down to the individual components, which means that when you get hit by something, it doesn't just reduce a health bar. With the X-ray view, you can actually see the way the projectile interacts with and destroys the components. And the damaged parts affect the way the vehicle handles as if they were really broken, at least until you hit the gas tank, which kinda removes the concept of handling altogether. So don't miss your chance. Join a community of over 95 million players on PC, consoles, or mobile devices by using my links in the pinned comment or description. And if you're playing on PC or console and are either new to the game or haven't played in 6 months, clicking my link will get you a massive bonus pack containing a bunch of premium features and rewards. This offer is only available for a limited time, so be quick. Speaking of quick, we still need to figure out how to lower my loop-de-loop time. The first thing I focused on was improving my lines. Optimally, I need to move in a path like this, mostly straight except at the corners, which I cut as closely as possible. However, my current personal best looked something like this. I was all over the track, mostly as a result of getting too close to the edge, overcorrecting, and then having to slow down while I recentered myself. Another problem that I had encountered was the fact that after finishing a run, I had to spam through all of the penguins' chat boxes, collect the star, wait for the animation to finish, go back to the observatory, wait for more animations, go back through the level selector, go through more incredibly slow menus, land in loop-de-loop, skip through more dialogue, and then finally get another attempt. This meant that nearly 2/3 of my time was being spent between runs, and it was really cutting down on my willingness to take risks. So I began searching for a solution, and shortly afterwards, I found one, right here. This is Assist Mode, another one of the features added in the Switch remaster. It's basically an easy mode that gives you 6 lives and brings you back to the ground when you fall off of it. But most importantly, when you enable it in the middle of a level, it brings you back to the beginning of your current section, which, in this case, is the start of the race. This meant that even after completing laps, I could just instantly teleport back to the start of the mission, cutting out all of the loading. With this newfound power under my belt, I got back to improving my time. And after a while of trying, I had gotten it all the way down to a 58.25, over half a second from my old PB. But I realized something. I had absolutely no idea if this was actually a good time or not. I mean, it seemed fast, but how much further could I really push it? I decided to check if the Super Mario Galaxy speedrunning leaderboards had a world record category for this challenge. I wasn't able to find anything for the race itself, but there was a run for the entire level, including the time spent loading in and collecting the star, which was the next best thing. I went to the end of the video and checked the time. 55.95. I was under 3 seconds away from this record. Now, 3 seconds in a run this short can be a lot more than it sounds like, but it's still not that much. Reaching this seemed just barely within the realm of possibility, so I decided that 55.95 was my new goal. But to reach this, I was going to need some improvements, so I decided to look into shortcuts. The most obvious candidate for this is the turn at the very end of the course. I had already been doing a slight corner cut here, but it seemed obvious that I could skip more. Now, the problem is that the waves make creating a consistent setup for this nearly impossible. Initially, it seems like it would be best to jump at a peak, where the wave is highest. But the thing is, the waves don't simply get cut off at the track edge. Instead, any bumps are tapered down or up so that the side of the course stays at a consistent height. So if we were to aim for the high parts, the manta ray would just end up facing downwards, which completely ruins the jump, meaning that you need to aim for the low sections. The consequence of this is that you don't have a whole ton of control over how much of the corner you cut off. All you can do is just head for whatever dip is the farthest to the right and take the jump. The next place that I decided to work on saving time at was the final turn in Section A. This corner is so sharp that it's basically impossible to turn fast enough to take the optimal line. I always ended up drifting further into the center of the track than I intended and lost a lot of time. But I discovered that if I jumped out of the water at the corner and immediately started turning all the way to the right, I could ride the edge of the track, which let me get around here incredibly quickly. My final optimization was at the upwards loop in Section C. I had a lot of trouble taking this initially, but eventually I discovered a trick to make it easier. This part is so steep and curved that if you hop once and then attempt to do another while underwater in a turn, the game tries to push you back up, but can't because you keep gaining more water above you. This locks Mario into this T-pose state, making you move up the spiral much faster. I tried replicating this on the Section B loop, and while it wasn't quite as strong, I could still get into the glitched state. With this, I felt like I had enough to start bringing my time down again, so I got back to work. And I almost immediately saw results. My best time quickly dropped all the way from a 58.25 to a 57.90, and then over the course of 50 or so runs, sped all the way through the 57-second range down to 57.01. The entire time, I'd been picking up new techniques and gaining skill with motion controls, but the most important thing that I had learned was that the manta ray's hitbox was a lot larger than I had previously thought. I only needed to keep this small sliver of its body on the course to avoid falling off, which let me take corners way more tightly. This did mean that it was much easier to mess up, but with my ability to instantly restart the level with assist mode and the potential for time save, I decided that it was worth it. Hanging off the edge like this did have one strange side effect though. For some reason, when I did this on a straightaway, like the one in the beginning of Section B, I would start bouncing up and down on the edge, almost like it was completely solid. I was a bit worried that this was slowing me down, but I ran a few tests and it seemed like it was about the same speed. But now, the sheer amount of things I had to do in this run were making it harder and harder to get consistently good attempts. Try after try ended in failure, but finally, after a few more hours, I got onto a pretty solid run. My start and first two small cuts were very clean. The hairpin at the end of Section A was a little scuffed, but it was fast enough that I didn't restart. And then, I got an almost flawless Section B. My edge bouncing and entrance into the upwards loop were incredible, and I was able to cut the turn incredibly tightly during the T-pose phase. All that was left to do was Section C. During the loop, I drifted into the center of the track a little, but this was immediately made up for with an excellent hop out of the turn and an alright ending cut, finishing off the race with a time of 56.75, a quarter second faster than my old run. I was now under a second away from my goal, but at this point, the amount of time save opportunity remaining seemed minimal. Sure, I could get a slightly faster run by simply improving in a few places, but this didn't seem like it would be enough to make up this time difference. However, I did have something that might work. When I had been doing my runs earlier, I messed up the ending shortcut a few times, causing me to fall off the track. But the interesting thing was, even though I was all the way down here, the lap still counted, meaning the entire inside of this ring was considered the finish line. So what if, instead of driving all the way up to the ending loop, I just jumped into the ring from down here? Now, this was a large gap, but by using the drop-off beforehand to build up vertical momentum, I could get quite a bit higher. I decided it was worth a shot and began trying. I wasn't very successful at first, I mostly just fell off after getting half-hearted bounces. But then, this happened. I got launched into the air and managed to make it all the way up to the top of the water. I crossed the line and nothing happened. The lap just didn't count. This was unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected. Most games that involve going around a track like this use a system of required checkpoints placed throughout the level in order to prevent you doing exactly what I just tried, and it seemed like this minigame was no exception. If I had any idea of where these checkpoints were, I might still be able to find a way to make this work, and I had a theory that might just let me figure this out. As I mentioned earlier, I had been using assist mode to reset the track without collecting the star, and since I was using assist mode, I would get brought back to the track when I fell off. But I had noticed something interesting about the way that this was implemented. The location that I would get teleported to wasn't random, but at consistent predetermined points. Therefore, when Nintendo was adding assist mode into the remastered version of Galaxy, they would have needed to manually create a bunch of respawn locations throughout the track. But what if, instead of making new points, they used ones they already had? The checkpoints. If this is the case, I can plot out the checkpoint locations by simply falling off the track at different points and recording where I get respawned. I switched to assist mode and began testing. A few minutes later, I had a map of all 7 of the level's respawn points, and theoretically, also the checkpoints. Examining this, we can learn a few things. First off, there is one in between the jump point at the bottom of the non-functional shortcut and the finish, which lines up. Hitting this would require me to do multiple turnarounds and quite a bit of backtracking, which seemed like it would probably lose time rather than saving it. But I had a much better option here. Section B. There were no respawn points throughout this entire loop, meaning if I could find a way to jump up onto the top part, I theoretically wouldn't be skipping any checkpoints. The problem with this is fairly obvious. How on earth are you supposed to get up here? Well, as we saw with the non-functional ending cut, when you enter the water stream from underneath, the game gives you a ridiculous amount of upwards velocity. So if we were somehow able to get below the track and then re-enter it, we might get launched high enough to skip the loop. I discovered that these rings were actually pretty bouncy when you hit them at the right angle, so I began trying to fall off the track onto them and get bounced into the water stream. This is a lot easier said than done. The part of the track inside the yellow rings is pretty cramped, and with the terrible handling of the manta ray, I was finding it incredibly difficult to pull this off. But then, something interesting happened. I went for a jump onto the final yellow ring, but completely overshot and ended up jumping all the way around it. But when I reconnected with the path, I hit it halfway down, which gave me a decent-sized launch almost into the upper water stream. I reset the race and began going for this instead. It was really difficult to recreate. Anytime I actually made it around the pole, I either missed the water completely or uselessly landed back on top of the track. But finally, after 30 minutes of trying, this happened. I got bounced back slightly by the red ring, but I was still on the track and over 10 seconds ahead of my old time. I flew through the rest of the course, took a small ending shortcut, and nothing. The lap didn't count again. I reviewed the footage hoping that I had simply missed the checkpoint, but it was pretty obvious. I definitely should have passed by the point, which meant that my theory about respawn points was wrong. There was some other checkpoint inside this loop that I was still missing. So it was back to the drawing board on how to cut down this 5675 by 800 milliseconds. But then a realization struck me. I had been consistently hopping throughout my run because it seemed like it sped me up, but was this actually even faster? I tried a few runs without jumping at all and very quickly got a new PB, which pretty conclusively determined that no, it was just way quicker to drive forwards without leaving the water at all. Was this the last improvement I needed to get to 55.95? Only one way to find out. My time started dropping quickly. 56.68, 56.55, 51.45. I was on fire. I had gotten so confident with motion controls that I barely spent any time with the manta ray's entire body on the track. I had perfected the starting cut to the point where it looked like I was hopping on thin air, and my lines were nearly flawless. And then, I got onto a run that looked like it might be the one. Section A was essentially flawless. B wasn't quite as perfect, but still incredibly good. And then, to follow it all up, I had the best Section C of my entire life. Everything was coming together, and as I flew towards the final gap and over the finish line, I checked the timer. 56.08, just over a tenth of a second away, so I kept going. 56.06, 56.03. Hundreds of attempts ended in failure, but I just kept slowly shaving milliseconds off, waiting for one to finally break through. 55.96, 1/100th of a second left. And then, finally, after over 1,000 attempts, this happened. I had done it. The 55.95 time from the speedrunning leaderboards had finally been broken, meaning I had conquered this minigame and could finally let it rest. Right? Well, there's something about manta ray surfing that I haven't mentioned yet. Loop-de-loop isn't the only course. There are two, and the other one, Loopy Swoop, is far more difficult, meaning in order to truly master this minigame, I would need to speedrun this one as well. A few hours later, I unlocked Loopy Swoop and headed over. Immediately, the track is far more intimidating than its predecessor. It's an absolute mess of looping, entangled water that seems almost impossible to parse, but when you break it down, it's a lot simpler than it looks. Like Loop-de-loop, this track can be best divided up by the sections in between the rings. Section A is basically one long turn to the left, broken up by slightly opposing corners. Section B is also fairly simple, just a steep drop-off before turning right into the red rings. C is where the track ramps up its difficulty. The road goes from being a reasonable width, similar to Loop-de-loop, to barely larger than the manta ray. The beginning of Section D contains a bit more thin road before you arrive at the track's defining feature, the loop. Following this, there's another incredibly steep drop preceding one final turn to the finish line. Before starting my attempts, I checked the full level world record like I had with Loop-de-loop and found out that my new goal was a 48.08, and with that, I started up the first race. Even with my vastly improved skills, Loopy Swoop was giving me a run for my money. I nearly fell off in a few places, and actually did in others. Regardless, I completed my first race with a time of 1:03.05. Clearly, I was missing quite a bit of time save, and I had a pretty good idea of where. The loop definitely seemed like it could be skipped with the right setup, so I got back to this point and began attempting a hop across. I jumped a few times, but was always blocked and brought here back to the track. Clearly, there was some barrier preventing us from hopping across here. But what about the other side? If there's no barrier here, theoretically, we should be able to hop around and land back on the track down here. I gave this a shot, and it was actually incredibly easy to pull off. I fell off immediately afterwards, which killed the run, but retried it a few times and was eventually able to get a time of 50-50, only about 2.5 seconds away. A large part of this time loss was happening in Section C. This part of the track was the absolute bane of my existence. At first, it looks like a basic upwards curve, curve, but when you look at it from a different angle, you can see that it's not a circle at all, but an almost square-like shape with a completely inconsistent turning angle. And even this likely wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for how incredibly thin the course is. Aside from the obvious difficulty of having less space to work with, the small size of the water stream completely changes the way the manta ray handles in these sections. Even as I got more and more used to this section, it kept being the major killer of most of my runs. I had actually done my best to cut this part out of the run entirely by sneaking up to the rings with a large bounce, but unsurprisingly, the lap didn't count. Another one of the problems I had to solve was in Section A. It was really difficult to keep myself on a quick path throughout these first 3 turns. I just couldn't quite turn sharp enough, and cutting off any of these corners was made impossible by the steep upwards angle. Eventually, I developed a better method for taking these corners. A few meters beforehand, you need to hop at the turn and quickly turn the controller all the way to the left. When you hit the course again, the game tries to push you upwards, but upwards from your perspective is now to the left, which forces the manta ray around the turn much faster. I had also figured out that the tiny ending cut I was doing could be improved by simply not going back into the water. I could just jump straight through the hoop, and even though I would fall and die, the game would still save the time. Over the next few hours, my PB dropped quickly. The 50 and 49 second range flew by, but when I got to 48.96, the improvements stopped coming. After about 30 minutes, I knew something had to change. So I decided to look into a new strat that I had been theorizing about, skipping the entire ending turn. Now, this seems far too large to jump across, but remember that beforehand is the largest drop on the entire course, so it might be possible to use this momentum to clear the gap. I started attempting this in runs and found that if I moved to the left and then quickly switched to the right direction directly before performing a jump out of the water, I gained a ton of horizontal velocity, launching me across the gap and letting me cross the finish line with a time of 48.63. But even this seemed like it could be improved. I went really far over to the left before the jump, meaning the amount of distance over the air that I could cover was greatly reduced. If I could do the jump closer to the edge, I could cut off a lot more of this corner. The problem was, when I tried this, I hit the edge of the stream and all my momentum disappeared, almost like it was solid. Exactly what it felt like when I did the edge bouncing on Loop-de-Loop. But then, I had a thought. Is it possible to get a large enough edge bounce to clear this gap? On my next attempt, I aimed for the very fringe of the course, and upon hitting it, I instantly got bounced off. I flew off the track forwards, but if I could pull this off while turning all the way to the right, it might just work. But when I tried it, I realized that this wasn't going to be as easy to pull off as I had hoped. By turning the manta ray this much, I significantly reduced the amount of hitbox directly under me, which, combined with the already very random loop skipping, made hitting this incredibly thin target infinitely harder. There were so many times that I thought I was going to make it, but was too far to either side, resulting in a useless water landing or missing the track completely. About an hour later, I finally hit the trick in a solid run, lowering my time by a few hundred milliseconds. I now had everything I needed to beat my goal of 48.08, but getting the right run was brutally difficult. Another 30 minutes later, I got a 48.38, a fifth of a second away. It took another hour to get a 0.02 second time save. Another 3 hours later to bring the time down to a 48.21, before another hour-long slog to cut off 1/100th of a second. I had become so good at this course that I could consistently complete sections A, B, and even C at PB pace, but over and over again, the loop skip and final cut killed the run. I was so close to my goal that I expected to break it at any time. And then, I got onto an insanely good run. Sections A and B passed smoothly, and after an incredibly sharp section C, I passed the loop at just over 40 seconds. I fell towards the jump spot, switched to facing right, and got a perfect bounce over the gap. I barely caught onto the edge of the course and flew over the finish line. 48.15. I was so close. Just 70 milliseconds left. And only 5 minutes later, a new chance came my way. $47.90. I had improved my PB by over 1/4 of a second and had gotten my first ever sub 48, finally putting this minigame to rest. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check it out for free on PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and mobile by using the links in the description and pinned comment. And remember, if you're new to the game or haven't played in 6 months on PC and consoles, you'll get a massive bonus pack with premium vehicles, in-game currency, and more. Now that I've mastered both of these courses, I'm never going to have to race with motion controls ever again. Wait. What do you mean they made a sequel?